USS Atlanta, CL-51, was sailing as a part of TF-67 on 12 November 1942, with 4 additional cruisers and 8 destroyers to meet an incoming Japanese surface force, consisting of 2 battleships and 11 destroyers intending on bombarding Henderson Field. In total darkness, the 2 task forces streamed towards one another until at 01:48, Atlanta was illuminated by searchlights from Japanese battleship Hiei, which was only 3,000 yards away, practically point-blank range for the battleship. The 2 sides began to open fire on one another, and the battle quickly turned into a chaotic and confused close-range melee in the pitch-black dark. During the wild fight, Atlanta, being exposed as the lead cruiser in the U.S. formation, was hit by several shells and took a torpedo hit to her port engine room, killing almost all power to the ship and leaving her guns inoperable. Right after being torpedoed, Atlanta drifted into the line of fire of San Francisco and took at least 19 8-inch shells from the friendly ship, killing Admiral Norman Scott and most of the bridge staff. Captain Jenkins survived the slaughter on the bridge and ordered the crew to begin clearing debris, jettisoning topside weight to correct the list, reducing the volume of sea water in the ship, and tending the wounded. As day broke, Atlanta was still without power and drifting about in the Sound. She was taken under tow by a tugboat, but by 14:00, Captain Jenkins decided the ship was beyond saving and ordered the abandonment of Atlanta. The ship was sunk by demolition charges by her own crew, going down at 20:15 on 13 November 1942. She lies in 400 ft of water, 3 miles west of Lunga Point. USS Juneau, CL-52, was engaged in the naval battle of Guadalcanal on 13 November 1942, firing on an enemy destroyer when she was hit by a torpedo on her port side from the Japanese destroyer Amatsukaze, which cut her speed to 13 knots, broke her keel, destroyed her fire control system, and disabled all electrical power and guns. Juneau withdrew from the action, and after the melee was over proceeded to Espiritu Santo with other ships damaged in the night's action. She was steaming 800 yards off the starboard quarter of San Francisco, down by the bow and making a steady 13 kn when she was spotted by Japanese submarine I-26. At 11:00, 3 torpedoes were fired at San Francisco but missed and hit Juneau. One of the torpedoes stuck in the same spot Juneau had been hit by Amatsukaze earlier, setting off an enormous explosion that engulfed the entire ship, breaking her into 2 halves. She was gone in less than 30 seconds. Owing to the massive explosion and quick sinking, it was assumed by the task force commander that nobody could have survived Juneau's destruction, and fearing more submarine attacks on his damaged force, he made the decision to not stop and pick up survivors. But over 100 of Juneau's crew had survived the sinking, and were left stranded in shark-infested waters for over 8 days before only 10 men were finally rescued. In total, 687 of Juneau's crew died as a result of her sinking, including all 5 Sullivan brothers. USS Columbia, CL-56, was struck by a kamikaze Val on 1 January 1945 while operating in Lingian Gulf. The plane hit the ship's aft quarter and penetrated 2 decks before its bomb exploded, killing 13 and wounding 44, and knocking out her rear turrets. Prompt and effective damage control prevented the fires from spreading and causing more explosions, allowing Columbia to remain on station. On 9 January 1945, she was hit again by a kamikaze Tojo fighter which crashed into the forward gun director gun mount, killing 24 and wounding 97 men. Again, Columbia's damage control teams jumped into action and kept the ship in action, able to resume her fire support despite the damage. Columbia would be awarded 10 battle stars for her service in WWII. USS Denver, CL-58, fought in the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay, 1 November 1943, when the Japanese heavy cruisers Myoko and Haguro fired 3 salvos at 22,000 yards. Denver was holed 3 times below the waterline by their 8-inch, 203 guns and forced to fall out of formation. Denver was operating in support of landings at Cape Torquena on 13 November 1943, when at 04:55 she was hit by an airdropped torpedo in her starboard side. 20 men were killed by the blast, which knocked out all power, and the ship took on a list. She was towed away to make temporary repairs. The ship would return to service in June 1944, awarded 11 battle stars for her service in WWII, and finally scrapped in 1960. USS Birmingham, CL-62, was operating off Bougainville Island on 8 November 1943 when her task force came under air attack by Japanese planes. She was hit by 2 bombs and a torpedo which blew a 30-foot hole into her port side, although she managed to shoot down all of her attackers. 2 men were killed and 34 wounded. On 24 October 1944, while sailing with TF-38, Birmingham came to the assistance of the stricken carrier Princeton, coming alongside to help fight fires, when at 15:24, a magazine detonated on board Princeton, causing extensive damage to Birmingham's superstructure. On board Birmingham, 239 men were killed and 408 wounded during the attempt to save the carrier. Birmingham had to put in for repairs, which were completed by Jan 1945. While operating off Okinawa on 4 May 1945, Birmingham was hit by an Oscar from directly overhead, which crashed through her main forward deck, its bomb exploding in the sick bay, killing everyone there. 51 were killed and 81 were wounded. The ship would finish WWII with 9 battle stars. She was scrapped in 1959. USS Biloxi, CL-80, was hit by a burning Val kamikaze dive bomber which crashed amidships at her port water line. The damage was minor, and luckily the plane's bomb was a dud, but 2 men were injured in the attack. USS Houston, CL-81, was operating with TF-38, which was conducting airstrikes on Formosa, when on 14 October 1944, the task force was attacked by Japanese planes. Houston was targeted by 4 torpedo bombers, 3 of which were shot down, but 1 managed to score a hit on the cruiser in the engine room, knocking out propulsive power to the ship. Houston was towed away from the battle area along with the cruiser Canberra. They came under a second torpedo bomber attack on the 16 Oct while still under tow. One of the enemy bombers hit Houston directly on the stern, causing flooding in the ship's scout plane hangar. Despite this, the ship was able to remain afloat with excellent damage control and return to the States for repairs. Houston would receive 3 battle stars for her service in WWII and was scrapped in 1959. USS Reno, CL-96, was sailing with TF-38 east of the San Bernardino Strait on the night of 3 November 1944 when she was targeted by Japanese submarine I-41. Reno was hit on her port side by 2 torpedoes, one of which was a dud. The other warhead detonated 4 decks below topside, killing 46 men and wounding several others. The ship lost all power and had to be towed over 1,500 miles to Ulithi, where she received sufficient repairs to power herself home. She earned 3 battle stars for her WWII service. Destroyer DD. Wicks class. USS Little DD-79 was acting as a high-speed transport ferrying vital supplies and reinforcements to Guadalcanal when at 01:00 on 5 September 1942, Little and her sister ship Gregory encountered the Japanese destroyers Udachi, Hatsuyuki, and Murakumo of the Tokyo Express. Although outnumbered and outgunned, the small old ship opened fire on the enemy ships until hit by a barrage of shells which set Little ablaze and caused her to quickly sink. Many of Little's crew were strafed in the water. 61 crewmen were lost with the Little. USS Gregory, DD-82, was acting as a high-speed transport ferrying supplies to Guadalcanal, along with her sister ship Little when at 0100 on 5 September 1942. The two ships encountered Udachi, Hatsuki, and Murakumo. At the outset of the engagement, a friendly Navy plane dropped flares that illuminated the two American ships in the black darkness for the Japanese to clearly see. Both American ships were on fire and sinking within a few minutes. The Japanese ships continued to fire upon men in the water, many of whom would spend several days in shark-infested waters before rescue. 11 of Gregory's crew were killed. USS Calhoun DD-85 was acting as a high-speed transport ferrying vital supplies to Guadalcanal when on 30 August 1942, while unloading cargo near Cucum Point, she was attacked by Japanese dive bombers. The enemy planes were obscured by cloud cover and managed to score numerous hits along the length of the ship. Calhoun was abandoned and sank, taking the lives of 51 men. 18 men were wounded in the attack. USS McKean DD-90 was acting as a high-speed transport ferrying marine reinforcements to Guadalcanal when on 17 November 1942, while approaching Empress Augusta Bay, she was attacked by a Japanese G-4M Betty torpedo bomber. At 0350, the enemy plane's torpedo hit the ship's starboard side, detonating the aft magazine and rupturing fuel oil tanks. McKean was engulfed in raging fire after the first smokestack and sinking by the stern when order to abandon was given at 0355. The ship went down by 0418 after several more explosions, taking 64 of her crew and 52 Marines with her. USS Rathburn DD-113 was operating off Okinawa on 27 April 1945 when at 22:00 a lone kamikaze targeted the Rathburn. Despite the ship's anti-aircraft fire, an evasive maneuvering the plane hit the port side on the water line, starting fires and flooding several compartments. Luckily, none of Rathburn's crew was hurt in the attack. Damage control was able to save the ship. She would be scrapped after the war. USS Ward DD-139 was acting as a high-speed transport conducting operations off Leyte when on 7 December 1944, Ward was attacked by a kamikaze G-4M Betty, which crashed amidships, knocking out power and starting blazing fires. The crew was unable to contain the fires and abandoned ship. Ward would be sunk by gunfire from escorting destroyers 3 years to the day after firing America's first shot in anger of WWII. USS Dickerson DD-157 was conducting escort duty off Okinawa on the night of 2 April 1945 when her group of transports were attacked by a large force of kamikazes. One suicide plane approached in a low glide before striking the base of the bridge and igniting intense fires. Nearly at the same moment, another plane struck the ship's forecastle, tearing a huge hole across the deck. Despite the valiant efforts of her crew, the ship was abandoned with a loss of 54 men killed. Dickerson's hulk was towed to a nearby base where, after a brief salvage and recovery of the dead, it was later sunk. USS Leary DD-158 was part of a sub-hunting task force when during a storm on 24 December 1943 at 0158, she was hit by a torpedo from U-275 on the starboard side. The explosion killed every man in the after engine room and was unable to move in the rough seas. As the ship was being abandoned, Leary was hit by 2 additional torpedoes which quickly put the ship beneath the waves. 98 of her crew were lost with the Leary. USS Palmer DD-161 was conducting minesweeping operations off Lingian Gulf when on 7 January 1945 around 1545, she struck a mine that knocked out a turbine and she left her formation to make repairs. While making repairs, at 1840, an enemy twin-engine bomber dropped 2 bombs that scored a hit on Palmer's port side. The ship became engulfed in billowing flames within a few minutes, prompting the crew to abandon ship. Palmer sank within 6 minutes of the mine explosion, taking 28 men with her and leaving 38 wounded. Clemson-class USS Southard DD-27 was conducting minesweeping operations in Lingian Gulf on 6 January 1945 when she was attacked by kamikazes in the afternoon. A suicide plane crashed into her stacks, wounding 6 men, and ricocheted off into the seas, causing minor damage. The ship was repaired and continued operating the next day. USS Hovey DD-208 was sailing with a minesweeper group on 7 January 1945 in Lingian Gulf when the U.S. ships were attacked by kamikazes. One plane flying low on the water dropped its torpedo and slammed into the ship's starboard quarter after being set ablaze. The instant the plane hit, the plane's torpedo struck the ship on the starboard side, knocking out all power. The crew abandoned the ship, which later broke in 2 halves. 48 men were killed. 24 of the dead were survivors from other destroyers sunk in the previous days. USS Long DD-209 was conducting minesweeping operations in Lingian Gulf on 6 January 1945 when a Zero kamikaze crashed into Get Portside, below the bridge about 1 ft above the waterline. The crew feared the magazine would explode and abandon ship. It would be struck by another kamikaze later that day, in the same spot the first plane had hit. The resulting explosion broke Long in half. 1 of her men died and 35 were wounded. USS Bari DD-215 was hunting German U-boat U-405 on 1 November 1943 when the submarine surfaced and the vessels engaged each other with gunfire. Bari rammed the U-boat, but a wave lifted the ship's bow on top of the submarine. The 2 ships struggled to break free from each other while exchanging small arms fire, but the Bari took major damage to her hull, flooding her forward engine room. USS Edsall DD-219 was responding to distress calls from USS Picos near Java on 1 Mar 1942 when she stumbled upon Kaido Butte, Japan's fast carrier force escorted by 2 battleships. The battleships Hiei and Kirishima and the heavy cruisers Tone and Chikuma took Edsall under fire at 27,000 yards, which expended her torpedoes and began to maneuver and turn to avoid the Japanese fire, severely hindered by the extreme range. However, a wave of bombers from the aircraft carrier Soryu crippled Edsall with a direct bomb hit, and the 4 surface vessels finished her off. USS Stewart DD-224 was en route to Bali on 19 February 1942, leading a column of Allied ships when they were engaged the Japanese destroyers Asashio and Ashio in the Battle of Badung Strait and crippled by multiple 5-inch, 127 shell hits. The ship made it to a floating drydock at Surabaya, but was abandoned by her crew and left behind after the ship fell over off its keel blocks into 12 feet of water. Surabaya would fall to the Japanese, who would raise the Stewart and commission the ship into the IJN. The ship would survive the war to be returned to the U.S. Navy and later sunk as a target. USS Pope DD-225 was escorting the severely damaged British cruiser Exeter on 1 March 1942 when a Japanese task force of heavy cruisers broke up the rescue effort. Pope sought refuge in a rain squall, but was soon spotted by a wave of 6 aircraft from the light carrier Ryujo. A near miss by dive bombers caused flooding, which prompted the crew to abandon ship just as the heavy cruisers Myoko and Ashigara closed for the kill. Most of Pope's crew would endure more than 60 hours in open sea before being rescued by the destroyer Ikazuchi, spending years in POW camps. USS Piri DD-226 was moored at Cavite, Philippines, when she was struck on her superstructure by a high-level bomber which killed 8 men on 10 December 1941. On 19 February 1942, Piri was attacked by dive bombers during the bombing of Darwin. She was hit 5 times by bombs that detonated her magazines, started flooding, and caused her to sink. 88 of her crew went down with her. USS Pillsbury DD-227 was attempting to rendezvous with friendly forces near Java on 2 Mar 1942 when she was engaged in a night action with the Japanese heavy cruisers Takao and Atago. The ship was sunk with all hands. 116 men were lost. USS Truxtun, DD-229, was acting as escort on 18 Feb 1942 off St. Lawrence, Newfoundland, when at 04:10 she ran aground amid a storm and immediately broke in half. The extremely violent and freezing seas took the lives of 110 of her crew. 46 were rescued. USS Brooks, DD-232, was hit by a kamikaze on 6 January 1945 in Lingian Gulf, which struck her port side, starting fires and causing flooding. 3 men were killed and 11 were wounded. The ship was towed back to the States and decommissioned. USS Gilmer, DD-233, was operating off Okinawa on 26 March 1945, when the ship was hit by a kamikaze in her galley deckhouse, which killed 1 man and wounded 3 more. The ship made temporary repairs and remained on station until 9 April 1945. Gilmer would resume her duties by early July. USS McFarland, DD-237, was operating near Guadalcanal as a tender and transport, when on 19 Oct 1942 she was attacked by 9 dive bombers. The ship took a direct hit on her stern, disabling the ship's steering and killed 11 men. Another 12 were wounded. The ship's crew made temporary repairs while moored at Florida Island and proceeded to Espiritu Santo, and finally back to Pearl Harbor by 29 December 1942. USS Sturtevant, DD-240, was escorting a convoy off Key West, Florida, on 26 April 1942, when the ship unknowingly sailed into an American minefield. The ship struck several mines within minutes and broke into 3 sections. 15 of her crew were killed in the sinking. USS Reuben James, DD-245, was acting as escort for British convoys as a part of the Neutrality Patrol, when on 23 October 1941 around daybreak, the ship was hit by a torpedo fired from U-552, which was aiming for a cargo vessel. The torpedo hit the ship's bow, causing a magazine explosion that blew off the bow away from the ship. The aft section of the ship sank 5 minutes later, taking 100 men down with her. 44 were rescued from the sea. USS Bari, DD-248, was on patrol off Okinawa on 25 May when she was attacked by 2 kamikazes off Okinawa. 1 attacker was shot down, but the second plowed into the ship below the bridge. 28 men were wounded. The ship was abandoned but did not sink. A skeleton crew determined the damage was too extensive to repair the ship, so all useful equipment was removed and Bari was towed to be used as a decoy. The Japanese took the bait and sank the ship along with its escort, LSM-59, on 21 June 1945. USS Belknap, DD-251, was covering the landings at Lingian Gulf and Luzon, when on 11 January 1945 she was attacked by a kamikaze which struck the ship in the No. 2 stack. The explosion killed 38 men and wounded 49, including members of the Navy's UDTs, and knocked out the ship's engines. The ship was towed to the Admiralty Islands and made enough repairs to sail to the west coast. USS Dale, DD-290, was supporting operations in Buna as a high-speed transport named SS Massia, when on 28 March 1943 she was attacked by 5 dive bombers, 6 miles off Oro Bay. Dale was hit at least 3 times and sank at 13. 11 of her crew were killed and 4 others wounded. USS Zane, DD-337, was acting as a high-speed transport ferrying supplies to Guadalcanal when on 25 October 1942, Zane and her fellow ship USS Trevor were engaged by the Japanese destroyers Akatsuki, Ikazuchi, and Shuritsuyu in Iron Bottom Sound in a running battle as Zane and Trevor attempted to flee. Zane took a direct hit on the ship's forward battery, killing 3 men, but maintained course until the Japanese ships gave up the chase after an hour. Zane was repaired and continued her service until scrapping after the war. USS Perry, DD-340, was conducting minesweeping operations off near Anguilla on 13 September when the ship struck a second mine in the last 30 hours. However, unlike the first time, the ship was severely damaged. Her engines lost all steam, and a significant list prompted the order to abandon ship only 2 minutes after the explosion. Perry broke in half and sank, but fortunately none of her crew was lost. USS William B. Preston, DD-344, was anchored off Darwin, Australia on 19 Feb 1942 when over 240 Japanese aircraft bombed the area in a massive airstrike. While attempting to make open sea, William B. Preston was struck by a bomb aft near the deckhouse near the living area, disabling steering. The ship was able to use its engines to steer itself away from the destruction that wrecked Darwin. 11 of her crew were killed during the engagement. William B. Preston would finish the war as a tender and occasional transport. Farragut class. USS Hull, DD-350, was supporting the Mindoro landings when on 18 December 1944, her fleet was hit by a hurricane-type storm dubbed Typhoon Cobra. Despite the best efforts of her crew, the hull was not prepared to handle the intensity of the storm, and after several minutes she rolled onto her side and did not return, being swallowed by the heavy sea. 62 of the ship's crew were rescued. Unfortunately, 202 were lost with the ship. USS Worden, DD-352, was participating in the landings at Amchitka when she was caught in a strong current which pushed the ship into shape-edged rocks, which opened her hull and knocked out all power. An attempt to tow the ship failed in the rough seas, and the Worden began to break up, prompting the crew to abandon ship. 13 of her crew would drown in the wintry sea. USS Monaghan, DD-354, was supporting the Mindoro landings when on 18 December 1940 her fleet was hit by Typhoon Cobra. The ship had been waiting to refuel and was not prepared to ride out the storm. The ship rolled back and forth in the intense heavy seas until a huge wall of water hammered the vessel, capsizing over to starboard. All except for 6 of Monaghan's crew perished in the sinking, the survivors clinging to rafts for several days. 256 of her men were gone. Porter class. USS Porter, DD-356, was sailing as a part of TF-16 during the Battle of Santa Cruz on 26 October 1942. During the action, she attempted to come to the aid of a downed TBF Avenger which had crashed nearby after being shot down by fighters from the Japanese light carrier Zuiho, when she was struck amidships in the forward engine room by a torpedo, most likely from the downed Avenger. 15 men were killed and 5 other men were wounded. After all the survivors were picked up, the Porter was scuttled by USS Shaw. USS Selfridge, DD-357, was attempting to intercept Japanese destroyer transports that were evacuating troops from Vella La Vella. The two task groups engaged each other at 23:00 on 6 October 1943 with gunfire and torpedoes. Selfridge attacked the enemy ships on her own after the O'Bannon, and the Chevalier collided during the engagement. A torpedo struck Selfridge on her bow, nearly severing the hull of the ship forward of the bridge. 49 of Selfridge's crew were lost, and 11 more men were wounded. The ship would have its bow replaced, and she would return to action by May 1944. Mahan class. USS Mahan, DD-364, was covering landings near Ormoc Bay on Leahy's west side on 7 December 1944 when a group of Japanese kamikazes attacked. Although several of the enemy planes were downed, 3 planes managed to strike the Mahan. 2 planes hit the ship's waterline on both sides of the ship near the number 2 5-inch gun. A third plane crashed just aft of the bridge. Despite valiant efforts of her crew to save the ship, the fires were out of control and ignited the forward magazine. After the survivors were taken off, Mahan was scuttled with torpedoes. The crew lost 6 men and 31 wounded. USS Drayton, DD-366, was operating in the Philippines near San Pedro Bay when on 7 December 1944 she was attacked by strafing Japanese planes. One of these planes, a Val, made a suicide run that struck the Drayton's No. 1 5-inch gun. 6 men were killed and another 12 of her crew were wounded in the attack, but Drayton was able to complete her escort mission and return to New Guinea for repairs. USS Lamson, DD-367, was operating picket duty near Ormoc Bay on 7 December 1944 when she was approached by a low-flying kamikaze off her starboard quarter. The ship was unable to train its main guns onto the target, and the plane crashed into the ship, starting a huge fire. The fires were deemed to be out of control, and the crew abandoned ship. However, firefighting continued by nearby rescue tug ATR-31, and eventually all fires were extinguished. The ship was towed to San Pedro and would be repaired. 4 of her men were killed and 17 wounded. USS Reed, DD-369, was escorting ammunition resupply convoys headed for Ormoc Bay on 11 December 1944, when at 1700, as many as 12 Japanese aircraft targeted Reed for destruction. In less than a minute, Reed shot down 3 planes but was struck by 4 kamikazes, one after another on her port side in several locations. The last plane to hit set off the ship's aft magazines, which tore the Reed apart. The ship rolled to starboard and sank at 17:02, taking 103 of her crew with her. USS Cassin, DD-372, was in dry dock on keel blocks in Pearl Harbor when on the morning of 7 December 1941, the base was attacked by a huge Japanese airstrike. A bomb had struck the Downs, which was alongside the Cassin in dry dock, and started uncontrollable fires. The inferno spread to Cassin, and the ship slipped from its keel blocks and rested against Downs. Both ships had their equipment salvaged and installed on all new ships rebuilt with their hull numbers. The Cassin would return to service by April 1944. USS Shaw, DD-373, was in floating dry dock at Pearl Harbor when on the morning of 7 December 1941, the base was attacked by a huge Japanese airstrike. The Shaw was singled out by dive bombers during the second wave and hit with 3 bombs on the forward part of the ship. Firefighting was abandoned at 9:25 and 5 minutes later the forward magazines exploded, wrecking the bow of the ship. Shaw would be repaired, her bow rebuilt, and amazingly would return to service by August 1942 to an illustrious career. USS Tucker, DD-374, was escorting a cargo ship into Espiritu Santo on 4 August 1942 when, as she was heading in through the western entrance, the ship struck a friendly mine. The explosion killed 3 of her crew and broke the ship in half. Most of the crew was rescued, and the 2 halves of the ship sank separately. It would later be determined Tucker's captain had not been notified there would be mines in his ship's path. USS Downs, DD-375, was in dry dock next to Cassin at Pearl Harbor on the morning of 7 December 1941, when the base was attacked by a huge Japanese airstrike. During the second wave of the attack, a dive bomber hit Downs with a 250 kg bomb which ruptured the ship's fuel tanks and started a raging fire. The dry dock was flooded to prevent the fires from spreading, but Cassin fell off her keel blocks and rested against Downs. Both ships had their salvageable equipment removed and installed on brand new hulls. Downs would return to service by March 1943. USS Cushing, DD-376, was sailing with TF-64 en route to intercept a Japanese fleet making for the Marine-held airbase on Guadalcanal on the night of 13 November 1942. The 2 fleets met in pitch-black darkness at 1:45, and a wild close-range gun fight erupted. Cushing was engaged by the light cruiser Nagara and the destroyers Yukikaze and Harusame at ranges closer than 3,000 yards. The ship was hit numerous hits in rapid succession and lost power through the fight. The ship continued to fight as best it could and launched several torpedoes at a nearby enemy battleship as the crew attempted damage control, but some 10 3.9-inch 10 cm shell hits from the destroyer Teruzuki destroyed any chance at saving the ship, what few it had in the first place. Fires, loss of power, and exploding ammunition prompted the order to abandon ship at 2:30. The ship's burning hulk stayed afloat until 1700 that afternoon before it finally sank. 70 men of Cushing's crew were lost. USS Perkins, DD-377, had been operating as part of the New Guinea campaign in the fall of 1943, when on 28 November 1943 she sailed from Milne Bay for Boona. At 200 on the 29th, she was accidentally rammed by Australian troopship Dundroon amidships on her port side. The ship split in half and sank 2 miles off Ipatito Island. 9 of her men were killed, another man seriously wounded. Her commanding officers were found to be at fault for the accident. USS Smith, DD-378, was escorting aircraft carrier USS Enterprise, CV-6, during the Battle of Santa Cruz when a damaged B-5N Kate torpedo bomber made a suicide dive on the small destroyer. The plane smashed into the ship's forecastle with a large explosion. Its torpedo detonated a few minutes later, causing more casualties. Despite the billowing flames, the ship's crew was able to put out the fires, with help from the wake of USS South Dakota, by late afternoon, and all guns remained operational. 57 of her crew were killed, and 12 more wounded. Smith would be repaired and returned to service in February 1943. USS Preston, DD-379, was sailing with TF-64 on 14 November 1942 en route to intercept a Japanese fleet making for the Marine-held airbase on Guadalcanal. The two fleets engaged each other around 23:15. During the battle, several of the American destroyers bunched together, making